You want to cut through the noise, right? To really get a handle on the forces shaping things without, feeling totally overwhelmed.
Yeah, information overload is real.
That's what we try to do here. And today, we're digging into something pretty fundamental to how decisions get made. Interest groups and lobbying. It's kind of like looking behind the curtain.
Exactly. And our guide for this is Chapter 10 on interest groups and lobbying. It really lays out the essential groundwork for understanding this, well, sometimes murky area.
Right. So our mission basically is to unpack what these groups are, what they actually do, and how much influence they have. We want to make it clear, maybe even have a few aha moments.
Because it affects so much.
Yeah, think about it. Local stuff, national news. You bump into the effects of these groups constantly. Okay, let's get into it. What exactly is an interest group?
Okay, so at its core, an interest group is a formal association, could be people, could be other organizations, that basically tries to influence government decisions and public policy. Organized persuasion, essentially.
Organized persuasion. So how is that different from, say, a political party? They both seem to want to influence the government.
That's a really key distinction. Political parties, their main game is getting their candidates elected, right? So they can actually run the government. Their platforms are usually pretty broad to catch a lot of voters.
Okay.
Interest groups, though, they don't typically run candidates. I mean, they might support or oppose them, sure, but their goals, usually much more focused. Specific issues like taxes, the environment, gun rights, or they represent a particular profession, that kind of thing.
Got it. More issue specific. You mentioned there's a huge range. Give us a couple of examples, maybe contrasting one.
Oh, absolutely. You have the big names everyone knows, like the Thera Club fighting for environmental stuff, or a giant company like IBM looking out for its corporate interests.
Right.
But then it gets really specific. Our source even mentions the North Carolina Game Fowl Breeders Association.
Game fowl breeders. Okay. That really shows the range.
It does. It highlights just how niche some of these groups can get.
All right, so we often hear the term lobbyists thrown around. Where do they fit into this picture?
The lobbyist is basically the point person. They're the one representing the interest group directly to the government officials, especially lawmakers. They're usually paid for this, and importantly, they generally have to register.
Register. With who?
With the government, depending on the level they're working at, federal, state, or local. The idea is transparency. Their main job is persuading policymakers.
And there are actual laws about this, right, to make it more open?
Yes, exactly. The Lobbying Disclosure Act of 1995 was a big one at the federal level. It sets out rules for who needs to register, lobbyists spending a certain amount of time lobbying their clients, lobbying firms. It's based on activity thresholds.
And campaign finance laws play a role, too.
They do, yeah. Those laws require organizations to disclose the contributions they make to political candidates. Again, transparency.
So this isn't just a Washington, D.C. thing, then. It happens everywhere.
Absolutely. Federal, state, local lobbying happens at all levels. But the definitions of what counts as lobbying and who needs to register, that can really vary from state to state or even city to city.
So, like, my neighbor emailing the city council isn't usually lobbying?
Probably not, no. But an organization spending real resources to regularly contact state legislators, that almost certainly is lobbying.
Okay. Our source breaks these groups down into types. Let's start with membership organizations. What are those?
These are the groups you join voluntarily, usually pay dues. They bring together people with, shared concerns or viewpoints. Think NRA for gun rights.
Or the opposite side.
Right, or Brady. United Against Gun Violence, pushing for gun control, like background checks. Figure 10.2 in the source kind of shows this contrast visually with pictures from different marches.
Then you've got companies and corporate groups. How do they operate?
Yeah, they don't have individual members in the same way. It's the company itself or maybe a government agency lobbying for its own interests. Verizon, Coca-Cola, they register to lobby to shape regulations.
And who does the lobbying for them?
They might have in-house lobbyists, people who work directly for the company, or they might hire contract lobbyists. These are outside firms or individuals who have multiple clients, often hired for their specific connections or expertise.
What about governments lobbying other governments? Seems a bit odd.
It sounds it, but it's actually pretty common. Cities, state agencies like, say, the Department of Education, they'll lobby the legislature for more funding or maybe more autonomy.
Who represents them?
Often legislative liaisons. Their job is basically to communicate the agency's or city's needs to lawmakers. The source gives that example from Mississippi in 2015 where universities lobbied against budget cuts.
Interesting. Okay, then associations or trade associations, what's their deal?
These bring together institutions, often competitors, from the same industry who share common concerns. Like the American Beverage Association, you've got Coke and Red Bull, rivals, but they might team up to lobby on, say, sugar taxes or industry regulations.
Hmm. Competitors working together. Makes you think.
It shows how powerful shared regulatory interests can be.
The source also mentions volunteer or amateur lobbyists.
Right. These are just regular folks lobbying without pay because they really care about an issue. Maybe not even part of a formal group. If they do register, sometimes they're called hobbyists.
Okay, so we have all these different groups. How do they actually try to influence things? What are the main strategies?
The source boils it down to two main approaches: inside lobbying and outside lobbying.
Inside lobbying first. What's that?
Inside or direct lobbying is taking the message straight to the government officials, lawmakers mostly.
Oh.
Things like testifying at hearings, providing research or data, sometimes even helping draft the actual text of a bill. Lobbyists see these direct methods are what they use most often.
And outside lobbying is more public.
Exactly. Outside or indirect lobbying aims to get the message out to the public. The goal is that public pressure will then push lawmakers to act.
So like press releases.
Yeah, press releases, working with the media, building coalitions with other groups, getting their own members to contact officials. The Sierra Club is a good example, really leveraging public awareness for environmental issues. Figure 10.3 shows one of their marches, illustrating that.
And the ultimate goal for all this is shaping policy outcomes. Can you give some concrete examples?
Sure. Think about ongoing debates. You've got groups like the National Right to Life Committee pushing for abortion restrictions, while narrow pro-choice America lobbies to protect abortion access.
Right.
Environmental groups want tougher regulations. Industry groups might want fewer. The farm lobby is always working on subsidies. It really covers the whole spectrum of policy.
But it's not just about changing laws, is it? What else do these groups do?
Oh, several other key things. They act like watchdogs, monitoring government actions.
Yeah.
The NAACP, for instance, keeps a close eye on voter ID laws.
That makes sense.
They also boost political participation, getting members involved, organizing rallies, get out the vote efforts. Think about the NRA mobilizing members after Obama's election. And they provide information both to the public and lawmakers, often framing issues strategically.
Framing issues. Like how?
Well, the pro-choice versus pro-life language is a classic example, or calling it climate change versus global warming. It shapes how people think about it. Figure 10.4, with AARP meeting healthcare policymakers, shows that information providing role.
The source also splits groups into public and private interests. What's the difference there?
Okay, so private interest groups are usually after what the source calls particularized benefits. Think advantages for just one specific interest or a small group, like a corporation getting a targeted tax break. They promote private goods.
In public interest groups.
They aim for public or collective goods, things that benefit pretty much everyone. Clean air, public safety, national defense. These goods are often non-excludable, meaning you can't easily stop someone from benefiting.
Like national defense.
Exactly. And they're often non-crowding, so one person benefiting doesn't reduce it for others. Public interest groups can struggle with funding sometimes, partly because the benefits are so broad, it's hard to get donations tied directly to them.
Which leads us to collective action problems. What's that about?
Right. This is the idea that it can be hard to get individuals to act together for a common goal, especially if the personal cost seems high compared to the personal benefit they expect to get.
And that connects to the free rider problem.
Precisely. The free rider problem is when people benefit from the group's work without actually chipping in time, money, whatever. Think about listening to public radio but never donating.
Or unions.
Yeah, unions are a classic case. They fight for better wages or conditions, and often everyone in the workplace benefits, even those who don't pay union dues. Figure 10.5 shows that Amazon protest, touching on this idea.
So if free riding is such a big issue, how do these groups even survive, let alone thrive?
Good question. They overcome it in a few ways. Sometimes they get big donations from outside patrons, foundations, wealthy donors. Smaller groups might find it easier because free riding is more obvious.
And incentives.
Crucially, yes, group leaders offer incentives.
Like what? What kind of incentives?
Well, there are material ones, tangible stuff like discounts from AARP, solidary incentives, the social benefit, connecting with people who share your views, like in an NAACP chapter. And purposive incentives, just feeling good about supporting a cause you believe in, like joining the ACLU.
And sometimes membership is required.
In some cases, yeah, like bar associations for lawyers, or historically some union memberships were required to work certain jobs.
The source also mentions disturbance theory. How does that explain group formation?
Disturbance theory basically says that big external events, things that shake up the status quo, can push people to form or join groups.
Like Rachel Carson's book.
Silent Spring, exactly. It raised huge awareness about pesticides, and boom, you saw a surge in environmental groups. More recently, think about the protests after the deaths of African-American men like George Floyd, shown in Figure 10.6, that really spurred activism on racial justice and policing. Ongoing issues like immigration, which Figure 10.7 touches on, also mobilize groups.
So these groups aren't just about lobbying Congress. They're a way for people to participate politically, right?
Absolutely. It's a huge avenue for participation beyond just voting. Movements like the Tea Party or Black Lives Matter, that Figure 10.8 highlights how groups amplify voices. They gave people a way to be heard collectively.
And they encourage other kinds of engagement.
Totally. Contacting officials, educating the public, it's all political participation.
Now, the source contrasts grassroots and astroturf movements. What's the difference?
So grassroots. Think bottom up. Ordinary people getting organized locally because they care about something. AstroTurf, though, it looks like grassroots, but it's often started or heavily funded by elites, corporations, or other powerful interests.
Like the Tea Party example.
Yeah, the Tea Party had real grassroots energy, for sure, but it also got significant backing from established groups like Americans for Prosperity. So sometimes the lines can blur.
We touched on framing issues earlier, but it seems like a major function educating the public and setting the terms of debate.
It really is. How you frame an issue, pro-choice versus pro-life, climate change versus global warming, massively influences public perception. And groups work hard to get their issues on the government's agenda in the first place.
And they watch how things play out.
Yeah, they monitor how policies like the Affordable Care Act or No Child Left Behind are actually implemented. And we see new forms, too, like #activism, think #MeToo, using digital tools to raise awareness and pressure decision makers.
The LGBTQ+ rights movement is another example the source uses, linking it to events like Stonewall, shown in Figure 10.9, and Harvey Milk's assassination.
Right. Those were pivotal moments. They really galvanized the community and led to the rise of powerful groups like the Human Rights Campaign. They've pushed for huge changes, like marriage equality, and now focus on ongoing fights against discrimination, debates over religious freedom, things like restroom access.
Are there any big picture trends in interest group activity lately?
Definitely. There's been a big increase in the sheer number and variety of groups over the last few decades. More groups representing institutions, corporations, but also more public interest groups like USPRG.
PRGs, what do they do?
Public interest research groups. They often focus on consumer protection, environmental issues, things that affect lots of people. Like student costs, that's a big one for student PRGs. The source actually nudges you to think about solutions for rising college costs.
Why the big increase in groups overall? What's driving it?
Several things. New issues emerge, like stem cell research. Power shifting more to the states made state legislatures bigger targets. More specialization, too, like doctors splitting into very specific medical associations. And technology. Social media makes it way easier for groups, especially smaller ones, to organize and mobilize.
And lobbying itself has become more professional.
Oh, definitely. It's
Yeah.
not just backroom deals anymore, or at least it's much more regulated. You've got the rise of these big contract lobbying firms. Table 10.1 shows some top earners. They bring serious resources and expertise. It's shifted from maybe an informal good old boys network to full-time professionals with more rules about gifts and transparency.
Okay, this is a big one. How representative is this whole system? Does everyone really get an equal say?
The short answer, probably not. The evidence points to inequality. Political participation in the U.S. tends to correlate strongly with socioeconomic status, wealth, education.
Why?
Well, lower-income folks often lack the time, the money for dues or hiring lobbyists. Even things like voter ID laws can be barriers. It can lead to lower efficacy, that feeling that you can actually make a difference. You see hints of this in Figure 10.10 from Occupy and 10.11 with minimum wage workers.
So it raises that question, whose voices get heard most?
Exactly, which leads to the debate between the pluralist view and the elite critique.
Can you break those down quickly?
Sure. Pluralists, like Truman, basically argue that people naturally form groups around shared interests, And the competition between all these groups leads to fair policy outcomes. Dahl suggested all legitimate groups can get heard.
But the elite critique disagrees.
Strongly. Thinkers like Schatzschneider argue that the system is biased towards business and the wealthy. They have more resources, better access. He had that famous line about the pluralist heaven having a heavenly chorus that sings with a strong upper-class accent.
And does the data back that up, the upper-class accent?
There's significant evidence suggesting it does. Studies show policy often aligns much more closely with the preferences of the wealthy than average citizens. Business groups tend to have, like, twice the clout of public interest groups, as figure 10.12 on business donations hints at.
What about the iron triangle?
That's a classic model showing that tight link between an interest group, a congressional committee, and a government agency all working together, sometimes locking others out. The issue network idea suggests things are maybe a bit more open and fluid now, with more players involved, but the core concern about unequal influence is still there.
Is it always stacked against less powerful groups, though? What about that neo-pluralist idea?
Right, the neo-pluralist take is more nuanced. It acknowledges that, yeah, some interests are privileged, but their success isn't guaranteed. It depends on things like public opinion, the political mood. Even powerful groups can lose if the public is really against them.
Like the fast food worker example.
Exactly. Those campaigns for higher minimum wages show that groups with fewer traditional resources can win significant victories through organizing and getting public support.
Okay, let's shift to the specific ways interest groups try to exert influence. Elections seem like a key battleground.
Oh, absolutely. Groups back candidates who support their views, hoping for access if they win. You see groups like the NRA or the Brady campaign issuing ratings for politicians.
And they tend to support incumbents?
Often, yeah. Incumbents have advantages, and groups want access to whoever is in power. Many groups form PACs, political action committees, to collect money and give it to candidates. Figure 10.13 touches on corporate PACs. There are limits on those direct contributions, though.
But then there are super PACs.
Right. Thanks to the Citizens United decision, super PACs can raise and spend unlimited amounts of money independently to support or oppose candidates.
Yeah.
They just can't coordinate directly with the campaign.
So PACs give directly with limits. Super PACs spend independently with no limits.
Basically, yes. It's led to a lot more money flowing into elections, indirectly.
Yeah. Beyond elections, how do they try to influence policy after someone's elected?
Lots of ways. Providing information is huge. Lawmakers are generalists, so they rely on experts. Groups provide info, suggest how to vote, voting cues. They get involved in agenda setting, even drafting legislation. Remember that USA Today investigation?
Who do they target?
Strategically. Lawmakers likely to be supportive, members of key committees, votes needed on the floor, and crucially, members of conference committees where House and Senate bills get reconciled. They lobby on budgets, try to block bills they don't like.
What about the executive branch or the courts?
Yes, they target the executive branch for how policies are implemented and for appointments. And they lobby the courts, too, trying to influence judicial nominations and filing those amicus curiae or friend of the court briefs in major cases. Think Obergefell v. Hodges on same-sex marriage. Figure 10.14 mentions the Human Rights Campaign brief. You can often find these briefs online, actually.
It sounds really hard to measure their actual impact, though.
It is. Very tricky, because they often support people who already agree with them, right? So, did the lobbying change the outcome, or just reinforce it? What we do know is that money and lobbying definitely seem to buy access, a chance to make your case.
Okay, let's wrap up with this fundamental tension. Free speech versus regulating these groups.
Yeah, it's a constant balancing act. The First Amendment protects speech, assembly, petitioning the government, all core to what interest groups do. But the debate is always about how far those rights extend, especially for corporations and unions, and how much regulation is needed to prevent corruption or undue influence.
The source walks through some of the legal history, like campaign finance laws. Any key moments?
Well, the Federal Election Campaign Act back in the 70s set initial rules. Then Buckley v. Valeo was huge. The Supreme Court said limiting contributions was okay, but limiting independent spending violated free speech.
And more recently?
The Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act tried to close loopholes, but then Citizens United in 2010 and McCutcheon in 2014 really opened the floodgates by equating corporate union spending with speech and striking down certain limits. That's kind of hinted at in the old Thomas Nast cartoon in Figure 10.15. It fuels that debate. should corporations have the same speech rights as people.
What about rules specifically for lobbying itself?
There are key laws like the Lobbying Disclosure Act and the Honest Leadership and Open Government Act. They define who lobbyists are, require registration and disclosure of spending, limit gifts, create revolving door restrictions.
Revolving door.
Yeah, rules that stop government officials from leaving their jobs and immediately becoming lobbyists, trading on their inside connections. President Biden also issued an executive order strengthening ethics rules, and states have their own lobbying regulations too.
Are there real penalties?
Oh yeah, fines, bans, even prison. The Jack Abramoff scandal, shown in Figure 10.1, was a major example of lobbying corruption and really spurred some of the later reforms. He himself became quite critical of the industry afterwards.
And this applies to foreign lobbying, too.
Yes, there's the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA, for those lobbying on behalf of foreign governments or interests. That brings up its own complex issues about foreign influence versus free speech.
Okay, so bringing this all together.
It's clear interest groups are incredibly diverse, right? They form for all sorts of reasons, use different tactics inside, outside, to influence policy at every level. Their formation often reflects societal shifts, but participation isn't equal.
And the whole system, how it works, how it's regulated, it's constantly being debated. That tension between the right to organize and speak out and the worry about too much influence, especially from wealthy interests.
Exactly. It's not a simple picture.
It really isn't. So, thinking about everything we've talked through today, maybe for you, the listener, what's the one thing about interest groups that stands out as most surprising or maybe most concerning? It's definitely food for thought and maybe makes you think about your own connections to these powerful forces.